それでは皆様こんにちは。それでは今から、パネルディスカッションを始めたいと思います。パネルディスカッションのタイトルとして今日は子ども教師のウェルビーイングを高める学校改革のあり方という形で題を決めさせていただきました。先ほど、パネルディスカッション、今から始めますパネルディスカッションでは招待講演をいただいて、それから報告をいただきましたこの登壇いただいております4名の皆様と進めてまいりたいと思います。今回のシンポジウムで皆様ご登壇いただいた方、それぞれ異なるバックグラウンドをお持ちでいらっしゃいます。マックブライアティさんは実践の立場から関わっておられます。それからトルビネンさんは行政官の立場から、そしてホさん、それから神林さんは学術的な立場からそれぞれ、ウェルビーイングについて関わられてこられ、それぞれご意見をお持ちでいらっしゃいます。このような立場の異なる方々とパネルディスカッションを行えるというのは、この本日のパネルディスカッションの一つの特徴であり、興味深いところであるというふうに思っております。それでは本日はよろしくお願いいたします。本パネルディスカッションの目的とまずはじめに確認をしておきたいと思います。これまで各登壇者の皆様のお話を通して、子ども教師のウェルビーイングに関する教育政策がどのような背景で議論され、学校で担うべきウェルビーイングの射程をどう設定し、どのような取り組みが進められているのか、そしてその取り組みをどのような指標で測定し、改善を図っているのかという視点から、各国での教育政策におけるウェルビーイングの取り方と取り組みを整理していただきました。そこで本パネルディスカッションでは、このような各国の取り組みを参照しながら、教育政策の中でも特に学校に焦点を当てて、今後の子ども教師のウェルビーイングを高める学校改革のあり方について議論してまいりたいと思っております。本パネルディスカッションでは、大きく2つの論点について議論したいと思っております。1つ目が学校改革におけるウェルビーイングの捉え方についてです。2つ目が子ども教師のウェルビーイングを高める学校改革のあり方についてです。まずはじめに学校におけるウェルビーイングの捉え方について改めて整理をした上で、2つ目の論点を議論するための議論の土台について共通理解を図りたいと思っております。その上で2つ目の子ども教師のウェルビーイングを高める学校改革のあり方についての議論を行いたいと思っております。それでは、早速1つ目の論点であります学校改革におけるウェルビーイングの捉え方について議論をしたいと思います。この論点については、まず1つ目として、そもそも各国においてどのような概念枠組みにおいてウェルビーイングを捉えているのかについて改めて整理していただきたいと思います。本シンポジウムの冒頭で藤原部長より本シンポジウムの元になっておりますプロジェクト研究の研究枠組みについての説明がございました。その中で本プロジェクト研究では OECD のティーチングコンパスなどに基づく概念枠組みを参照しながらウェルビーイングの捉え方を検討しております。また日本の捉え方として、宇月副部長から第4期教育振興基本計画についての説明もありました。そこでまずはじめに各国においてウェルビーイングをどのような概念枠組みで構成される概念として捉え、どのように定義しているのかについてお話しいただきたいと思います。そして加えて各国においてウェルビーイングということが重視されているのかされていないのか、されている場合においてはどのような視点から教育政策において重視されているのかについてもお話をいただきたいと思います。それではまずはじめにマックブライアティさんお願いいたします。
ありがとうございます。I guess I would say that in the UK we have no single framework. I think it's fair to say. We have a series of overlapping ideas that certainly draw on hedonic and eudaimonic perspectives. But the philosophy around well-being is, you might politely say, organic in its evolution. You might also say it's less well thought through at a philosophical level. We have seen in the last couple of years an increased focus on flourishing as a concept in narratives in the UK. But I think that the part of the United Kingdom that is most thoughtful about well-being is Wales. So that small part of the UK on the western seaboard has worked quite hard to develop its own sense of what a whole school approach to well-being might look like. So it's the well-being and mental health of the student, intended the pupil, the young people, intended to be at the center of the work of all of the different stakeholders in the school community. And this is very clearly linked to a public health concern for the well-being and mental health of children and young people. So of all of the parts of the United Kingdom, I think that is the most clearly articulated position or conceptual framework for any of our nations in practice. And I guess just the last thing I would say on this is the way in which we have an overlapping and perhaps not very clearly delineated perspective is captured in the most recent policy paper that's come from our Department for Education, published just last month. And the title of this policy paper, this we call it a white paper, but it will become provide a legislative framework for education in the United Kingdom. The paper is titled "Every Child Achieving and Thriving." So there's a little bit there of wanting to have your cake and eat it, arguably, but that is the future direction, I think, of policy over the next 3 to 5 years in the United Kingdom. Thank you.
イギリスの政策的なところの変化についても触れていただきありがとうございました。それでは次に保さんお願いいたします。
Thank you. The basic idea of well-being of students as well as teachers in Korea is Unibonian perspective of well-being. We're trying to shift this idea of well-being towards more flourishing, more towards doing well, not just being well. So that is being emphasized. And so, for example, 2 years ago I was in this research project that how do we know when a student is flourishing? In other words, how do we measure students flourishing? We can measure students' academic achievement pretty easily, but how do we measure students' well-being, eudaimonic well-being, flourishing? The key core idea that we used in that project was activities that are intrinsically valuable to a student. So that's an individual level, right? And the other was satisfaction of societal and psychological need. Yeah. And so that is a combination of individual plus combination of individual and the society. So those are the key ideas that we are trying to emphasize in shifting our, I can't say it's a paradigm, but some sort of a wave that we want in student well-being. So hopefully that explains the concept of well-being. It definitely doesn't capture all of the idea, but certainly some of the ideas that we tried in terms of the policy reform.
ありがとうございます。韓国はお発表の中でも触れていただいたユーダモニアの考え方というのがとても強くで、一方でその学力との関係についてもいろいろ議論しながら進めていらっしゃるということがとてもよく分かりました。ありがとうございます。それではトルビネさんお願いいたします。
Yes, thank you, Midori. If I look at the children's perspective, in our curriculum we have, for example, one of the framework that we use in Finnish education, it's Desi and Ryan's self-determination theory, which explains how students' motivation grows when 3 basic psychological needs are met. And it's autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And this framework shows how supportive learning environment, for example, enhances both learning outcomes and student well-being. So, in Finland, we focus much for our class and our learning environments, how we build that. And of course, when students feel in control of their learning, they become more engaged and motivated. And also when they experience and feel is capable, their confidence increase. And when they feel connectedness to the teachers and other peers, they learn more effectively and they feel safe to participate also. So one example for autonomy, students are given meaningful choices in their learning, for example. And if we think about competence, the tasks that we are given for children are matched to the students' skill levels. So not so easy tasks, but challenging, but achievable. And relatedness is something like that that the learning environment provides for emotional safety and belonging. We talk a lot about loneliness in Finland nowadays, and we talk a lot about belonging, how we belong to the groups, how we belong to the school community. And we think that good relationship with teachers and peers encourage also the participation, and you feel that you belong one group or the community.
ありがとうございました。フィンランドは特にその子どもを中心にしてカリキュラムであるとか学習環境っていうふうなところでの、概念がきちんと整理をされているというところを改めてご説明いただけたかと思います。今お聞きいただいた通り、各国ともウェルビーイングというなかなか捉えどころがなかなか難しい概念について各国それぞれ試行錯誤しながら、教員であったり、それから哲学的なものであったり、それから子どもたちというところでの視点でいろいろと、概念を整理しながら取り組んでいらっしゃるというところが伺えたかと思います。そういう意味ではこれからきちんと私たちが研究していく上でもそうですし、政策を作っていく、実践をしていくという意味では、そういうウェルビーイングをどういう視点で捉えていくのかというところを、きちんと共有しながらやっていくことが改めて重要ですし、そのことを議論していくこと自体も重要であるというふうに改めて、伺いながら、分かったところです。でそういう意味では今各国でどういうふうに捉えているのかというところを改めて整理していただきましたので、その上ででは各国においてどういうふうな取り組みをしているのかというところについては、先ほどプレゼンテーションの方でかなり詳細にご説明いただきましたので、そういう取り組みがどういうふうな条件整備をしながら進められてきているのかというところのお話を次にしていただきたいというふうに思います。で各国において先ほどご報告いただいた中では、多様な、教師に軸を置いたり、子どもに軸を置いたり、先ほどフィンランドであったような教育課程の部分であったり、多様な側面から多様な政策が行われているということが分かりました。で特に、今回パネルディスカッションでは学校改革という視点に焦点を当てておりますので、学校において取り組むために各国においてどういう条件整備や支援が行われているのかについて次にお話をいただきたいと思います。で次に合わせてですね、それを取り組む上で、今まで さまざまに試行錯誤されて取り組んでこられた中で、最も困難であったことはどういうことであったのか、そしてその困難なことをどういうふうな戦略で克服してきたのか、あるいは克服しようとしているのかということについてお話を伺えればというふうに思います。では先ほど日本での取り組みもご紹介いただきました神林さんの方からまずお願いいたします。
はい、ありがとうございます。まず、諸外国と比べて日本というのは制度が少し違うところがあるかと思うんですけれども、これまで日本の、生徒教員のウェルビーイングっていうところ、ウェルビーイングという言葉自体は使ってこなかったかと思うんですが、日本は全ての教育機会っていうところをすごく大事にしてきたのかなっていうふうに見ております。例えばいろんな学校の校舎を見ても、校舎の作りっていうのが法律でかなり決められている。そして1クラスの人数っていうのも極端にその地域によって差が出ないようにするとかですね、そういった法制度で教育機会、そして特に義務教育小中学校では機会均等というところを大切にして、どの地域で生まれ育っても質の確保された教育を受けるというところを大事にしてきたのかなというふうに見ております。で、ちょっとお答えとずれてしまうかもしれないんですが、それが今状況がやっぱり多様化してきている中で、その一律でもちろん法整備とか条件整備で国として教員であったり教室環境を整えるっていうところでは共通のものもあるんですけれども、その共通な対応がやっぱ難しくなってきているっていうところがあって、それが今の状況にあって、それを捉え直すっていうところがこのウェルビーイングっていう考えなのかなっていうふうに見ております。っていうところで、そうですね、でその中で、今まではその国、中央政府そして地方教育行政で整備されてきているというところ、今もこれからもそういった側面は大事になってくるかと思うんですが、やはり今後のところを考えてみたときに、やっぱり個々の学校や地域によって子どもや教師が置かれている状況っていうのが異なるということを踏まえると、やはり学校レベルで見ていかないといけないというかですね、アプローチしていかなきゃいけない。例えば管理職、学校単位でその児童生徒の様子を見てカリキュラムをアレンジを加えたりとかですね、指導体制を構築したりとか、そういったようなところが今後大事になってくるし、そこが今難しい、なかなかその学校でできることっていうのも一方で制度の中でできることももしかしたら限られている部分があるかもしれないというところ、ただ一方でできることもあると思うんですけど、それをどう発揮するかっていうところが今難しい状況に置かれているのかなということで、ちょっとずれてしまったら申し訳ございませんが、ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございました。とても日本の日本的な意味での構成を目指すための条件整備が行われているっていうふうなところっていうののお話があったかと思いますし、それから今でいう管理職のところっていう意味では日本の学校が持っている自立性というところでの違いもすごくお話しいただけたかと思います。そういう意味ではこれからお話をいただく各国ともそれぞれ学校との自立性も違うと思いますので、ぜひその辺も含めながらどういうふうな条件整備というものがされていて、それをどういうふうに克服されてきたのかというあたりのお話もいただけたらと思います。それでは次にブライアティさんお願いいたします。
ありがとう。So I guess I think that one of the significant conditions that was intended to improve our system in the UK was moving schools out of local authorities, away from local boards, into more autonomous trust structures. And this quasi-marketization of schools was intended to bring a range of benefits to the system, I think including, probably incidentally, but including well-being. I think in practice that dream has not been realised and the difficulties facing schools have remained. I would say that in the UK, we are not in a position of having protective approaches in place or proactive approaches in place, but rather we are reacting now to a series of what could be construed as crises. So there is a view that we have a mental health crisis facing our children and young people. I showed you some grim statistics that certainly look pretty dreadful. And we have a teacher supply crisis driven by the relative unattractiveness of working in education in the UK now. So I think those are the kind of the big headwinds, and therefore the response is to react to those within a very kind of relatively short-term horizon. In so doing, I think that there is a need to address the challenges I mentioned earlier. We see these wider pressures fall on schools, where schools sort of hoover up all the aspects of other parts of the public sector that are broken, whether it's health or housing or social care. Those parts of our public sector that do not work well anymore, by default, those issues end up in our schools. And so that is one of the really biggest challenges we have when it comes to well-being, because we don't have many teachers for whom you put a child in front of them who is not okay, and the teacher doesn't want to help. Of course they want to help, they're a teacher. And it is very difficult to change and transform our education system whilst we have that level of imbalance. I think that recognizing the scope creep that has happened in the role of teacher it's certainly one of the challenges, but recognizing it, which is very recent in this new policy paper from the Department for Education, I think is the first step in beginning to try and address those challenges for us, and to, like we've heard from both Finland and Korea, to rebuild public services around the school, really, and to allow educators to educate. Teachers love to teach. And if we want to keep teachers in the profession, I think we are well advised to allow them to teach. I think you ask about what some of the strategies are that have been useful. We are trying, with regard to teacher well-being, we are continuing to try and address workload and work-life balance. Those are two really important planks of any policy, and we have strategies at the system level where the government stakeholders are trying to minimize unnecessary bureaucracy and to specify the things that schools do not need to do, so that some old habits and old workload can be let go of. In schools, it's really important at a school level that workload is considered if change is going to happen. And we support schools, and schools themselves that are leading the way are already doing this, to routinely review workload at the level of school and department, and to determine what can they stop doing, what can they pause, what can they skip for a term. Those are really small practices, but actually have a disproportionately positive impact on workload for teachers, which in turn frees up time to think about what else we can do to improve the system. And I guess the last thing I'd say is around leadership development. Most school leaders have had significant professional development in pedagogy and curriculum development and in financial management of a school. Very few have had good quality professional development in leading teams and creating cultures in which educators can thrive, if we use that word. So I think that's something that we're beginning to talk about and see, but is going to be really important going forward. Thank you.
はい、ありがとうございます。とても幅広くお話をいただいて、特にイギリスの場合は学校が自立性を持っているっていうところでの、その一方で教員不足であるとか、それからメンタルヘルスなどの危機的状況とのアンバランスの中ですごく試行錯誤をされてきたというところがすごく読み取れたかなと思います。その中で政府もその外の学校の外にいる人たちがちゃんと認めてあげて、しかも学校の中の実態をちゃんと示していった上で、特にその中で重要なのがこのスクールリーダーの育成とかリーダーシップであるという点はとても興味深く伺いました。ありがとうございました。それでは保さんお願いいたします。
Thank you. In my presentation, if you recall, I have talked about a recent bill that was passed. Literal translation again is Student Customized Integrated Support System, which easily said is a holistic approach to, or eudaimonic approach to student well-being. So before, we had a very hedonian perspective, which is a very individual level. But from that the shift that we're trying to make to a eudaimonian perspective of well-being, it's not an individual matter. It's a community matter. It's a school level matter, even a societal matter of defining what is student well-being. So with that bill, the bill required schools to organize a committee at the school level, individual school level. So the school principal becomes the chair, and there is the vice principal sometimes not, depending on the school size. There are teachers, head teachers, master teachers coming in, one or two, and there are also outside experts, social workers, such as and psychologists, and many others who are thought to be helpful for a particular student, particular situation, meaning that what can we do for this student and this particular situation in terms of well-being. And that's required. So all schools from this year, from this academic year, does have that functioning or not, we don't know yet, but all schools do have that committee. What are the challenges? Of course, it's challenging to make a definition with more people sitting on the table of what is student well-being. Before, as I said, hedonian perspective, it's my matter, my happiness. But now we have to have a certain agreed upon concept of student well-being at the classroom level, school level, community level, even at the national level. So that's a huge challenge, and I'll call you if I hear some successful stories.
ぜひその成功した暁にはお話を伺いたいというふうに思いますけれども、やっぱり今まで個人の幸せとかを見ていたのがホールスクールアプローチのような形で、組織、という形で見ていく。でしかもそれを支えるコミッティを作ったっていうところの取り組みはすごく興味深く伺いました。ぜひ成功した暁にはご報告いただければというふうに思います。ありがとうございます。それではトリブネンさんお願いいたします。
Thank you. First of all, in Finland, we renew our curriculum every 10 years, and now it has been over the 10 years, our last curriculum that we have launched. But we have still renewed our curriculum step by step, and in Finland, we have just renewed our support for learning, like your country. And it's something like that. We have earlier we have 3-level support. Now it's gone, and we have only support for learning and school attendance. And we focus on group-specific support. And of course, if needed, child-specific support also. So this is a little bit shifting in our thinking. And it's a quite big reform because it's effect on every teacher's work, not only special education teachers, but whole school community. And in Finnish researchers has said to us that a big reform and its implementation lasts at least 8 years that it has complete. So if we want quick results, it's not going to happen. So let's wait and see how it's going to be. And one good thing that we have renewed also, so you know that we are Nokia people and we like smartphones and so on, but we have now gone some backwards because we banned mobile phones at schools, and also we have this recommendation for parents when to buy a smartphone to children, and the recommendations are something like that: a smartphone not recommendation for children under the age of 13, neither use to social media, and the recommendation also have this kind of screen time, screen time, and we recommend that no screen time under the 2 years old, none, and for example, 1 hour screen time for children aged 2 to 10, and 2 hours for age 11 to 13. And of course, these recommendations concerns children's free time and not homework or task that it's related to the school. So parents is quite happy about that, I think, because they could say that in Finnish government says that you should do that and that. But let's see how it's affecting. And we think that our learning outcomes, while these are decreasing, for example, reading skills, it's not the one reason why this has decreased, because we think it's the many reasons, and I think one reason is that social media that we have in our lives. We only read short texts, so its effect on our reading skills, and also that how we are stressful and calm. So yeah, we are happy about that recommendation, and let's see how it's going to be and how it's going to affect our learning outcomes.
ありがとうございました。とてもタイムリーな日本でもどうするのか、スマートフォンをどうするのかっていうところが議論になってました。オーストラリアの動きなども日本で報道されて、そのことが子どものウェルビーイングであったり学力について関わるっていう部分でのとても具体的なお話を聞かせていただいて、とても一つの事例として興味深く伺わせていただきました。そういう意味で各国ともいろいろな大変な状況にありつつもさまざまな条件性を学校がどういうふうな制度の下で行われているのかという違いを意識しつつも、そういうふうな条件整備をきちんとしながらさまざまな困難な取り組みに、対応して今取り組まれているという実態が分かったかと思います。でこういうふうに各国ともいろいろな試行錯誤をしながらやっていくという上では、その取り組みが実際やってみた上で、成果を上げているとか上げていないっていうことをきちんと把握しているからこそ、こういうふうな試行錯誤ができるのかなというところがあるかと思います。そういう意味では今日の発表の中にもありましたかなり指標を明確にした上で測定して検証している国というのがあるということも分かりました。でこの点についてぜひどういうふうな手法でどういうふうに測定をしているのかというところをかなり先進的に取り組まれているフィンランドとそれからイギリスの方からお話を伺えればと思います。ではトルビネンさんお願いいたします。
Yes, thank you. So we are monitoring also teacher well-being and student well-being. So as I said, we combine that results also. So teachers' well-being is monitored by the University of Helsinki and Teacher Union in every year. And this teachers' study examines work engagement, burnout, perceived competence, sense of belonging, and autonomy of work. So these questions are asking in the teachers. And when we are asking at the children, the school health promotion study is conducting by our health education administration every second year. And the survey is for children and young people, and that data have been collected from, for example, comprehensive schools that are grades 4 and 5, so they are 9 to 11 years, and grades 8 to 9, who are 14 and 16 years old. And since 1996 already we have conducting in this survey, so we have quite longitudinal research about that. And we think that this study gives an opportunity to monitor trends and assess how well-being is going to be in the children's eyes. So, and it gives also update information about how children and young people are doing at school and also at free time. And it's good that we hear about the student voice also, not only the teacher's voice, but also the children's voice. And for example, they highlight issues like bullying and loneliness and safety also. So we have this data about that, and the systematic well-being research strengthens both our education as schools and quality, and it's also support for these students and teachers. And yeah, I think it's a good way to research how the well-being is going in the children's eyes and teachers' eyes.
はい、ありがとうございます。生徒と教師の両方の視点から、しかも多様な大学、それから組合、それから政府が温度を取りながらも大学、それから組合などと連携をしながら多様な、視点で、調査をし、しかもそれを継続的に一人の子どもたちを追っていって継続的に長期的に把握して傾向を測った上でさまざまな取り組みにそのデータを活用しているという点では大変興味深く伺わせていただきました。ありがとうございました。それではマクブライエティさんお願いいたします。
Thank you. I think I'm not an expert on children and young people, but at a high level, I would say that we treat statistics on attendance, school attendance, as kind of quite a foundational and fundamental indicator of where children are in our system. And that's become very much more important post-COVID because we've seen a very significant impact and reduced attendance among children and young people. I think alongside that, we have a range of health indicators that are considered important in the different nations of the United Kingdom, and that would include mental health statistics, questions on happiness, on belonging, on loneliness, the extent to which a child or young person feels that they have a trusted adult that they can turn to, and the extent to which they feel they have friends. And whether they can speak to those friends. So there's a variety of data captured by survey there as well on that. I think what we are just about to start doing much more of in the UK is trying to track student engagement So there are some platforms that are being used now directly in schools with a variety of different ways of trying to measure student engagement, but this is seen as quite an important new data set for the education system. So I think from our children and young people's perspective, those are all in the mix around well-being. When it comes to staff and teacher well-being, at the school level, actually, it's hard to beat a good old-fashioned staff survey. And we work with lots of schools and encourage schools to routinely deploy independent staff surveys with a good range of questions to hear directly from staff about what they are experiencing. It's important that such a survey is independent so that there's confidentiality if we want to get good results back. But that remains very important at the school level. In terms of teachers more broadly across the system, we use the Warwick-Edinburgh mental well-being score that I referred to earlier to look at the population of teachers compared with our general population. But we also use the questions that are derived from the Oxford model, and not just us, the Department for Education is using those now as well. So tracking teacher job satisfaction, sense of purpose, positive effect, positive emotional experience in their work, and stress as an indicator of negative effect. So those are quite central now to the tracking of well-being. But I would say that, you know, there are a wide range of measures that we actually look at in practice because there is so much nuance. Well-being, we've talked today, it's a bit like trying to nail jelly to a wall. I don't know if that translates into Japanese, but it's very amorphous as a concept. So therefore, we end up trying to look at more indicators. So we will look at loneliness. For example, in the UK, we see the loneliness among teachers is twice the level that it is in the general population. That's quite inexplicable. And even higher again, when we look at teachers who come from a minority ethnic background. So we've got some issues that we can immediately see we will need to attend to there. We look at the number of hours worked because of the health impact of hours worked. We look at the desire to leave the profession. And actually, I think desire to leave, we're not troubled is probably the wrong word, but it's not that we think everybody who says, and we have a question that is, have you seriously considered leaving? Have you looked for another job? That desire to leave or propensity to leave is, yes, interesting in its own right, but it's also a proxy for how people feel. For us, teacher retention isn't just about keeping warm bodies at the front of a classroom. We want really vital, engaged, and energized educators in our classrooms. So if people really want to leave and they're trying to find another job, that's quite important information at the system level. Then we would also look at sickness and attrition, as we heard in your presentation earlier, really important data there, and we look at that routinely. So I think those probably are the key ones that we would be looking at in terms of teacher well-being.
はい、ありがとうございます。ありがとうございました。とても多様ないろいろな視点を今いただけたと思います。生徒で言えば、アテンダンス、いわゆる出席率のデータであるとか、ヘルシーなのか、健康的な部分も含めたヘルシーなのかっていうふうな点、それからスクールエンゲージメントという言葉もすごく重要なキーワードであったかと思います。そういうのをきちんとデータセットにして活用しているっていうところも大変興味深く伺いました。それから教員の部分で言うと、一般の職業と比較をするっていうことを、イギリスでは重視されているっていうことで、そういうことができているっていうことも大変興味深いですし、特になんですかね、離職率っていうところについての、それがどういう意味合いを持っていてどれだけ重要なのかっていうご指摘も大変興味深く伺えたと思います。そういう意味で各国とも、両国ですねとも多様な 視点で多様な指標を用いながら、それをちゃんと継続的に取っていって、それをきちんとデータセットとして活用できるような形で整備しているっていうことが、こういうふうな試行錯誤の土台としてとても重要になっているってことを改めて2カ国の事例から気づかせていただけたかなというふうに思います。ありがとうございました。でそれでは、韓国も含めて日本もですけれども、それぞれの国がいろいろな試行錯誤をして苦労しながら、各国におけるウェルビーイングと視点から、教育政策の改革に取り組んでいらっしゃるということが分かってきたわけですけれども、次に今の一つ目の視点をもうちょっと議論もしたいんですけれども、時間の関係もありますので、次の2つ目の論点に移っていきたいと思います。今前半では教育政策の政策的な部分でのお話が、どういうふうに学校のところに下ろされてきているのかという話をさせていただきました。で、2つ目の論点としては、じゃあ実際学校の中でですね、どういうふうに子どもと教師のウェルビーイングを高める取り組みをしているのか、そういう学校改革に取り組んでいるのかというところの視点に移っていきたいと思います。でまずこの2番目の論点の1つ目としては、子どもそれから教師のウェルビーイングを高めるために、各学校にさまざまなアクターが関わっていると思います。関わるとすれば、国、地方自治体、それからスクールリーダー、教師、保護者、地域住民、それから子どもたち自身です。それから学校の外に目を向けますと、ボランティア団体であるとか非営利団体、民間企業などさまざまなアクターが関わって学校というものが構成されてきているかと思います。でそういう中で学校におけるウェルビーイングの向上において、そういうさまざまな各国において関わっているアクターがどういうふうな役割をして、それからそういう人たちがどういう関わり方をしているのかという点について、各国の取り組みについて伺ってみたいと思います。先ほどホールスクールアプローチというところで学校外のさまざまな専門家も関わったりとか、それから地域のコミュニティの方も関わるというお話を保さんの方からいただきましたけれども、もう少しそのあたりについて詳しくお話をいただければと思います。まず保さんからお願いいただけますでしょうか。
Thank you. Before I get to that point, I would like to briefly talk about turnover intention, if that's okay. Many people talked about it. Turnover intention is important because, not because it shows that teachers are stressed or teachers are burned out. 10 out of maybe 3 teachers actually leave the profession, meaning that 7 teachers actually have no choice but to stay in the teaching position, even though they have strong intentions to leave, which means that the students are stuck with the teacher who has no interest or less interest in teaching. So that's a very important piece that we need to pay close attention, actually. And many people actually are looking into the effects of the teacher intentions to leave in terms of teaching and learning activities in the classroom. Yes, I just wanted to point that out. School reform. As I said, we are trying to involve many outside people, inside people for this bills or policy newly implemented from this year. The question there is, do we want school reform by policy, or do we want school reform by practice? Which means that top down or bottom up, or if there is bottom up. Personally, I believe all policies are top down. When it comes to policy, it is top down. There is no bottom up policy. The idea may be bottom up, but once it becomes a policy, it's a top down. Inevitably, all around the world, any kind of policies. Okay? So So the question that we need to address, particularly in Korea, is that do we leave the school committee of student well-being do what they do? Or the question is, how much does the government or the provincial office of education guidance intervene with their activities? Okay, and another question is that how schools play smart in involving outside experts into the school. So we see that in school counseling, for example. So in the past 15 to 10 years, Korean schools, it was a policy to involve school counselors. And of course, at the beginning, we were short in the numbers of school counselors who had certificate. So we invited those people outside of schools, right? Psychologists or the people who are experts in adult or, I don't know, marriage counseling. And that didn't work out at all. So school needs to be very smart that who will be involved in that committee and who will be in the decision making. So I think it's a practice matter. It's a practice matter. And all as this concept of well-being is based on individuals, all the matters and all the students or all the concepts that we talk about at the school level needs to be dealt at the school level, which means that top-down policy would have its limitation.
ありがとうございます。やっぱりその、ボトムアップの難しさもあると思いますけれども、その実際トップダウンできたものを、現場でどういうふうな形で活用していくのかっていうことの、大切さと難しさのお話をいただけたかなというふうに思います。そういう意味でそのスクールコミュニティとか、それからそのスクールカウンセラーをどういうふうに導入して活用してきたのかっていうところの、それは日本でもいろいろな取り組みをしている部分でもありますので、そのご経験を共有いただけたのはとても興味深かったです。それから先ほど一番初めにおっしゃっていただいたその離職っていうところでも、先ほどマーク・ブライデンさんのお話にもありましたけれども、その辞めていくっていう人たちのその理由とか、その部分っていうのにちゃんと着目して取り組んでいくっていうこともとても重要だっていうメッセージはとても貴重なメッセージをいただけたかなと思います。ありがとうございました。それでは次にトルビネンさんお願いいたします。
Yes, thank you. So I little bit disagree with you because in Finland we think about that we are renewing our education from bottom up, but of course sometimes top to the down, because for example this mobile phone case is coming from the teachers and from the principals, because in Finland earlier a student can bring their mobile phone and use that on the lessons and even answer for the parents in the lesson time. So it was quite disruptive thing in school. And then they give feedback to the ministry and tell that we need a legislation about that, because otherwise it's not going to work. We can't do anything if it's not in the legislation. So then they prepared a law, and now the principal says that reports it's now half year that has been in that mobile phones are banned in the lessons. So they say that it's lessons have become more calmer, and students interact more each others and even more physically active during the breaks, because they don't some of the school denied mobile phones also in the breaks. And for example, in the lower classes they even don't have the mobile phones with them. So that's one of the example. And also the support for learning is also that we give feedback that our 3-level support doesn't work at the school, because it gives so much writing work to the teachers, so they want to give that up. And they say that it's not supporting students so well. So you know that in Finland we have two administration level. We have the state level and then we have the municipal level. And municipal level, they have freedom to organize education in the field in the area on their field. So they have a lot of autonomy, and they have a lot of autonomy to arrange the school days, hiring the teachers, hiring the principals, and so on. So, but still they are, still they have these documents. For example, Basic Education Act and our national curriculum that they are following. But yeah, they are happy to have this autonomy. And also schools have autonomy, principals have autonomy, and teachers have autonomy. So we have trust in all levels in our education system.
はい、ありがとうございます。逆にボトムアップの国としてスマートフォンの導入の話をいただけて、そういう意味でその学校の自立性とか地方自治体それぞれが自分たちで自立性を持ちながら取り組んでいけるからこそのボトムアップができているっていうところで、さまざまな関係者がその関係性を持ちながらボトムアップの仕組みを整備しているっていうところでのお話はとても興味深く伺いました。ありがとうございます。それでは最後に、実際今学校の外でさまざまな形でサポートするという組織で学校に関わっていらっしゃるマック・ブライアティさんからぜひお話を伺えたらというふうに思います。よろしくお願いいたします。
Thanks very much. I mean, my first comment is I want to move to Finland, but that might not be appropriate to say. But obviously with a long stint in Japan on the way, I should say. I think when we think about trying to reform, we have to be, my view is we need to try and be quite holistic in engaging stakeholders. Policymakers make the weather for school. So what policymakers decide is critically important, but it also doesn't determine everything. Policy moves very slowly. And that's to the frustration of policymakers as well as to schools sometimes. But we can change a policy and a teacher can still close the door and do the thing they did yesterday. That is still true in schools and across education. But when we have responsible policymakers who think deeply about the concepts that they are trying to embed in a policy environment, I think that's very important. And it's one of the things I come away from this symposium very impressed by, actually, is the depth of thought that's going into this agenda. As policymakers, I think it's important to engage with the conditions that teachers work in. I made the point before, and I'll make it again, that the relationship between working hours and rest is of critical importance, and that is in the policymaker's domain to address and to do differently. And even where you have something that is such a national matter of identity and culture, education is the place to be brave and bold and to take new steps. I think we turn to policymakers to do that, to have that vision, and to bring the support along the way that can enable change. I think I would also say that in the UK we have a slightly different system because we've got a high level of school autonomy, relatively, which means that policy is made actually in 1,000 places all at the same time, not necessarily pointing in the same direction, and that's for good and for bad. So we have actors in our system who bring policy from the front line, from schools, and have become very loud voices in policy making in the UK. We also have representation through social partnership of the unions that represent school leaders and the unions that represent teachers. And so there are a lot of voices around that policy table trying to co-design something, put aside their differences, and get to something that can be shared as an objective. I think school leaders are a critical group. School principals matter so much. And if there was only one access, one level of the system that I could engage with, it would be with school principals, because what they do day in, day out, in terms of how they act as an umbrella for their staff team, how they protect staff, how they challenge staff, the standards that they set, the climate that they set, this matters so very much for the outcomes for our children and young people, and it matters, of course, for the workforce in those localities. So the vision, the commitment that our principals bring, their relational skill, their ability to listen and be open. I lead an organization, and I have to reflect with some mirth on the research that would show in organizational life, the research indicates that the higher we go, the less sensitive we become to social status. And so I say this with some humility. As we become leaders, we can become very disconnected from people who work in our teams. And that's a risk that we can manage if we are alert to it. And school principals, and the best school principals, do that brilliantly. They treat everybody with respect and dignity, and they retain their openness. And actually, that is a really critical asset in school reform that we probably don't use often enough and support often enough. I think teachers and teacher voice is important. In my country, teachers feel a bit browbeaten. They feel a bit tired and exhausted of having the same debates and arguments, and they don't want another new initiative. So we've got some work to do to help them find their voice without that being yet another demand upon them. We need to make it feel like a valuable use of time and like an opportunity to improve their own well-being and professional competence and capacity. I think the voice of pupils is so important. When we think about any school reform, we're very serious expert adults. We often forget to talk to children and young people. And I'm 50 years old. You could say, what do I know about what it is to be 14 and in school? And it would be a legitimate question, as my son routinely reminds me. We need to hear from children and young people. That doesn't mean we have to do everything they tell us, but we do need to understand where they're coming from. So I think, for me, those are the really key voices I would want to see. And I think finding our way to get a sense of shared purpose, to overcome some of the debates and tensions between those stakeholder groups is really important. And the better we can do that, the more hopeful I am for the policy outcomes that we might achieve.
はい、ありがとうございます。とても子ども、それから最後です。子どもの声、それから教師の声、それからスクールリーダーの声を聞く、それをどういうふうに政策に反映させていくのかっていうところのすごく重要なご指摘をいただいたかなというふうに思います。そういう意味で冒頭で藤原部長の方から私たちの研究プロジェクトにおいても教師の声を聞くってことを大切にしていくってことを説明申し上げましたけれども、改めてそのことの重要性っていうのを気づかせていただけたかなというふうに思います。それから、そういう意味でその政策っていうのは重要だけれども、それを学校にどう届けていくのかっていうそこの間をつないでいくっていうところでの管理職の先生がちゃんとフロントランナーになってちゃんと政策を学校の中で浸透させるし、学校の中の声をちゃんと政策に伝えていって、そこでの橋渡しをしていく上でのそのスクールリーダーの重要性っていうのもとても重要なメッセージをいただけたかなというふうに思います。そういう校長を支えていくような関係者がちゃんといるっていうこともイギリスの強みであるかなというふうに思っております。ありがとうございました。それでは次の今いろいろなアクターが関わるというところのお話を伺いましたけれども、その中でもやはりその学校においてウェルビーイングを実現していくという意味では、やはりその中核になるのは子どものウェルビーイングであり、それから教師のウェルビーイングであるというふうに考えております。そういう中で、いろいろな子どものウェルビーイングと教師のウェルビーイングっていうのは今日の皆様のプレゼンテーションの中でもいろいろな関係性がある。でそれを各国においてさまざまな捉え方をしながら政策が作られ実践がなされているということが分かったかと思います。そういう意味で、改めて最後にこの一番重要な視点である各国において子どもとそれから教師のウェルビーイングの関係をどういうふうに捉えているのか、でその関係性の中で 関係性が生まれる背景とか理由についてお話をしていただいた上で、それに対して各国がどういうふうなアプローチをとって取り組んでいるのかというお話を最後に、伺えたらというふうに思っております。まず保さんお願いいたします。
Relationship between teacher well-being and student well-being. I want to ask all of you, are we being too greedy to have well-being of students and the teachers at the same time? Is that possible? At least so far, in the case of Korea especially, and I think it applies to many other countries as well, the equation of student learning, we need more teacher input, more hours, more efficacy, more professional development. So the indicators, the traditional indicators that we use to measure teacher well-being, such as job satisfaction, self-efficacy of the teachers, professional learning, professional growth, they all connotates to students' learning and students' growth, students' well-being. So there's clearly a trade-off, We are not able to, at this point, we are not able to achieve both student and teacher welfare, or well-being, I'm sorry. We need to change that idea that students' happiness, well-being is something different. I don't know what. So please don't ask me. But in our schooling equation, clearly there's a trade-off at this point. So we need to get deep. We need to get deep of what it means when we say teacher well-being. In recent studies of the new generation teachers, we find that job stability, which is a strong carrot of teaching profession, students' growth, which is also a merit of being a teacher, is no longer an interest when the new generations are finding or looking for a job. Colleagues presented a work-life balance. Their individual growth and the development and growth of their interest is more being emphasized and considered important when choosing a job. So we have to dig in, actually, and we have to dig in what we mean by teacher welfare or well-being. I'm sorry, I keep saying welfare, but the traditional concept or conceptualization of it, concept map of it, we're going to have to sacrifice our teachers. So once again.
はい、ありがとうございます。重要なキーワードは、今現状としてはそれはトレードオフになっているっていうところは、すごく重要なキーワードだったかなと思いますし、もう一つがやっぱり、従来の捉え方ではない新しい捉え方をしていくっていうことが重要だっていうご指摘はとても示唆にとって、刺激的といいますか示唆に富んでいたかなというふうに思って伺いました。ありがとうございます。それでは次にトルビネンさんお願いいたします。
Yes, thank you. And I want to point also that leadership thing that Sinead also said that I think that high quality leadership affects both of these groups, teachers and also the children, because teachers need support also. They need that principal trust them, and also they need some collaboration together with adults in the schools. And in Finland, we are talking a lot about this co-teaching. For example, 2 teachers are teaching together the classes, and they have shared responsibility for the children. And that's it quite effective way to teach, because you are not alone. You have somebody to discuss about the matters of the class, if they behave good or bad, or what to do, or something like that. So it has risen in Finland to co-teach together. Also, we think that we also should differentiate the teaching, because not every children need the same teaching methods, but we should think how the children learn. So we should have a separate groups, smaller groups that we teach, and also focus on how the children learn. So I think these affects both children and teachers' well-being. And when you have smaller group in your classes, it's much more effective to communicate each children and students. So I think that's one of the way, and I strongly think that these are linked together. So when teachers are feeling well and are happy with their job, so its effects on children's well-being too.
ありがとうございました。そのフィンランド、独特とではないですけど、フィンランドが今取り組んでいるコーチーティングというその2人で教えていくっていうところで、先生方が自信を持って子どもたちとコミュニケーションいい気持ちの中で、子どもたちとコミュニケーションを取ることによって子どもたちのウェルビーイングも高まっていくっていうその構図ができているっていうところのお話はとても興味深く伺いました。ありがとうございます。では最後にマクブライアティさんお願いいたします。
Thank you. So I think one of the things that we see very clearly in our work is an association between children's well-being under pressure leading to teacher well-being under pressure. So we see that when one is down, the other goes down. We also have some academic studies in the UK and I think there's certainly some internationally as well, that indicate that positive teacher well-being is associated or can be associated with better academic outcomes. So we have, maybe we have an idealism, but we hope for a possibility of maybe optimizing well-being rather than maximizing either. So rather than seeking to maximize teacher well-being and maximize pupil well-being, we have to somehow find an optimization between the two. And that might be different and nuanced in each country, I don't know. I do know that in our context, we are so far away from having positive well-being for either that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, that we can align the intention, that we can ensure that educators are able to engage in purposeful activity that yields good outcomes because they see improvements for their students. And if alongside that we can minimize the empty work, the illegitimate tasks that take up so much of teacher time, then we have some case studies and examples that suggest that's quite positive and can improve the well-being of both. So I'm happy to nail my colors to the mast of idealism on this one, because I think there is so much space for improvement around both the well-being of teachers and the well-being of pupils, incidentally, both of which, when we look under the bonnet, have similar issues. Both talk about overwork, both talk about stress, both talk about excessive demand and an inability to respond to that. And there's something going on when both our children and our teachers are saying the same thing, although expressed differently in their contexts. I think the only last thing I'd say about this relationship is there's some work around epistemic trust that matters particularly for the youngest children. And in effect, young children's brains need a biological signal to be ready to learn. And that comes from being seen and feeling safe. a stressed teacher is less able to make that connection robustly. So there's something very important here that matters even more, I think, for our youngest learners. Thank you.
はい、ありがとうございました。とても子どもとそれから教師のウェルビーイングっていうことを両者がとても重要で、その両者を最適化して最大化をしていくっていうことを各国の状況の中でどうしていくのかってことの必要性がすごくあるというお話はとても下に飛んでいたかなと思いますし、その子どもがそもそも生物学的を学びたいって思いをどういうふうに教師が汲み取りながらそれを最大化していく中で教師が自分のウェルビーも高めていくのかって、そういう意味でその両者をどういうふうに最適化して最大化していくのかっていうところについて各国でこれからも議論できていけたらいいのかなというふうに思って伺いました。ありがとうございました。すいません、私の時間管理が十分ではなかったら、あともういっぱい聞きたいところはあるんですけれども、あと少しもう8分ぐらいしか残っていませんので、最後にですね、いろいろなお話を伺って、日本の現状や取り組みと類似する点もあれば異なる点もあって、さまざまな発見を皆様していただけたと思います。で、そういう意味で最後に今回イギリスと韓国とフィンランドからお越しいただいて、それぞれの各国において子どもと、教師と子どものウェルビーイングを高める学校改革の、具体的なお話をいっぱいしていただきました。で、そういう中で各国が試行錯誤しながら取り組んできたというところの実態もお話をいただけたので、ぜひ最後にその中から皆様が得てこられた教訓のようなものを、ぜひ私たち日本の政策立案者であったり学校関係者へのメッセージとして一言ずついただきたいと思います。本来だったら4分ぐらいいただきたかったんですけども、時間の関係で1人2分ずついただきたいと思っています。で、あと神林さんからは各国の取り組みをお聞きになった上で、今後の日本の、国や地方自治体、それから学校、それから研究者たちがどういうふうなことに取り組んでいけばいいかということへのメッセージをぜひいただけたらと思います。まず神林さんからお願いいたします。
改めましてお三方の先生方ありがとうございました。すごく私自身も多く学びがありました。ありがとうございます。で、いっぱいあるんですけれども、ちょっとかいつまんでお話ししますと、まず保先生からいただいたこのトレードオフっていう視点、すごくハッとさせられたなというふうに思いました。日本も歴史的に見るとこの間学習指導要領をずっと10年おきに変わってきましたけれども、やはりこの学力を重視するのか、それとも学習内容を減らし、いわゆる減らしてゆとりを増やすかっていうのの、ある意味二項対立的なところで触れてきたかと思うんですけれども、ウェルビーイングをどう捉えるかっていうものによって、学習指導要領等のですね、組み立て方変わってくるのかなというふうに思いました。やっぱり授業内容を増やそうで学力をテストの得点とか高めようとすると、どうしてもやっぱり授業内容を増やしてっていうところになってて、一方で子どもたちが授業をついてこれないっていう問題が出たりというところで、これをどう両立していくかっていう視点がすごく、日本を改めて考える必要があるのかなというふうに思いました。で、あと、教員のウェルビーイングっていう点ではフィンランドそしてイギリス双方すごくやっぱ先進的な取り組みされてるかなというふうに改めて勉強になりました。で、フィンランドのところでは評価のところでそのランキングじゃなくて発展的に改善に向けた評価をするっていうところがすごく印象に残って、やっぱ改めてこの評価っていうとランキングをよく日本だとつけたりっていうところがあるんですけれども、やっぱりそれをやりすぎてしまうとやっぱり圧力になってしまうというところで、やっぱり改善できるための評価っていう視点っていうのが改めて制度としても政策としても大事なのかなというふうに思いました。で、イギリスの事例ですと、やはり日本ではイギリスも日本と同じように教員の長時間労働等が問題になっているというところで共通参考になる事例いくつたくさんあるんですけれども、特に印象深いのがまさにこの エデュケーションサポートさんのようなこの NPO とか NGO がこう教職員の支援に入ってるっていうのがすごく可能性というか興味を持ちました。日本ももちろんそういった団体等はありますけれども、どうしてもやっぱり困った時に周りの先生に何かこう助けを求めるってなった時に管理職や同僚教員って一方で評価する、特に管理職ですけれども、日本の場合だと管理職っていうのはその先生の教員評価も行ってたりとかするので、なかなかその悩みとかをこう打ち出しにくいっていうところが正直あるのかなって、そういった側面もあるのかなというふうに思います。そういった中でこの第三者機関が教員の支援入るっていう仕組みっていうのは、日本をこれから広げる余地があるのかなというふうに思ったところです。すいません、ちょっと長くなってしまいましたけれども、本日はどうもありがとうございました。
ありがとうございました。的確にいろいろな点を間違えていただいたと思います。それでは次に保先生お願いいたします。
Thank you. I too learned a lot actually from the presentations and the discussions. I said this same thing to my Korean colleagues last year, but I hope we don't think that we can achieve everything in the school reform. And some teachers might want to work late hours. I don't know why, because they don't want to go home, because they have chores at home, I don't know. But we are all different in terms of happiness and well-being. So policy standpoint, we need a agreed upon concept of happiness, well-being. But let's not try too much, finding this happiness. That's first thing that I already talked about last year to my colleagues. The second piece is more practical, which I want to talk about in terms of government, public, and professions, the relationship, which we call it the relational reasoning. And some people say it's a power knowledge, power not. It's a not among the government, general public, and the profession. So the relationship between them or among them should be very close. But what we see over the past 20, 30 years, there's a disconnection between the professionals and the government, the professionals and the general public. I don't know why. It might be different by countries, but we see that a lot. In my personal opinion, it's because of the strong policy, strong initiatives, strong so-called drive, policy drive. I don't know if Japanese use that term, but whenever there's a new leader in position, I understand that this well-being is pushed by the new cabinet of the Japanese government. Strong, very powerful drive, and it will disconnect. It will disconnect the relationship between the professionals, meaning the teachers and the students, parents, and the relationship between the teachers and the government. So that's something that we need to be very, very cautious about in reforming schools or reforming education.
ありがとうございました。私たちが肝に銘じなければいけないところをすごく言っていただけたかなと思います。それではトルビネンさんお願いいたします。
Thank you. First of all, if we look at teachers, in Finland, teachers' holidays are determined by collective agreements, and in summer, teachers have non-teaching time to approximately 2 months. So they are not in the school, they are not teaching, they are not preparing anything, so they are resting. So I think that you probably can think about that summertime, and because I think it provides recovery time from high psychological and emotional demands of their work. And then when Finnish teachers are coming in August at school, they are very eager to teach again. So they have time they own and non-teaching time. So I'm not sure if it was 5 days or, but yeah, something like that. It's quite little time. But yeah. And then another thing is that maybe you can think about this well-being survey for children, to launch that, and check about the children's way to think about well-being, and then make some decision about your education reform.
ありがとうございました。2ヶ月の休暇で体と心身ともにリセットして帰ってきて、もう一度モチベーションを高めるというのは、今日会場、それからオンラインで聞かれている方がどう聞かれたのかっていうのがとても私自身は気になるところではありますけれども、そういう意味ではすごく良い、それを自分たちで先生方が勝ち取ってきたっていうところのメッセージもすごくで、しかもそれを政策として実現できているっていうところの、プロセスもフィンランドは積まれてきた上でのそういう現実だというところを伺うと、これから私たちがどういうふうに何をしていかなければいけないのかっていうところにすごくインパクトがあるメッセージをいただけたかなと思います。ありがとうございます。では最後にマックブライティさんお願いいたします。
Arigato gozaimasu. So I think I agree with Pia on this point. We have an expression in English that prevention is better than a cure. We do better, I think, here to embed good protective structures around work and rest into our system than trying to fix people who have been broken by their working lives. So I strongly echo that point. And I think the second point for me is this. You have a fantastic system. You have so much richness here. It's really inspiring to have had the opportunity to be in your schools and to see your practitioners, your staff who care so deeply, and to watch the relationship between a classroom teacher and their students. I was really humbled by that experience. So I guess I would wish for you to continue to think deeply about how you engage in this agenda and to not rush into generic approaches or, obvious approaches. I think the cultural specificity always matters, but it really matters here. You have so much to protect and to build on that I think taking your time and being cautious with that is a good thing. And I think it's important not just to, when we have questions and metrics and so on, not just to translate those as is, but to really get to the root of conceptually, what is it that matters for the Japanese school system? That for me feels like a really essential place, and I was very heartened to hear that that seems to be a direction of travel in the thinking. So please continue to do that. And thank you so much for your generosity in having me and us here, and I too have learned an enormous amount. Thank you. Arigato gozaimasu.
はい、ありがとうございます。改めてそもそも文化的な違いも踏まえた上で、そもそも私たちの根本に何があってこういう改革をしなければいけないのかって、もう一度改めて自分たちの出発点に戻っていくことの重要性を最後にいただけたかなというふうに思っております。ありがとうございました。私のちょっと時間管理がうまくいかず、ちょっと5分過ぎてしまっておりますので、これで終わりにしたいと思いますけれども、ワークブライティさんの最後のご講演の時に千里の道も一歩からっていう日本語を言ってくださって、まさに私たちはその出発点に今立っているところですので、その自分たちが今何をしなければいけないのか、何を目指していかなければいけないのかをもう一度改めて関係者、子どもを中心に置きながら、それから教師の先生方も中心に置きながら、関係者がきちんとどういう方向性でいくのかっていうのを改めてきちんと考えていかなければいけないなと思いましたし、私たちの研究が、その一つの エビデンスを生み出していけるようなプロジェクトになっていくように、私たちもしっかりと研究をしていきたいというふうに改めて思いました。4人の登壇者の皆様、さまざまなメッセージをいただけて本当に感謝しております。それでは最後に皆様最後に拍手でお礼を申し上げたいと思います。ありがとうございました。これで長時間にわたり皆様ご参加いただきありました。ありがとうございます。これでパネルディスカッションを終わりたいと思います。